The old man sat on his porch, sipping his morning coffee, the steam rising into the cool air. His hands were rough, weathered from years of hard work and service. He had fought for his country decades ago, carrying memories he rarely spoke about. Now, in his small, quiet town, he lived a simple life, gardening, reading the newspaper, and occasionally visiting the local diner where folks still called him Sir out of respect. That morning, however, the peace was shattered by the sound of tires screeching to a halt in front of his house. 2 police cars pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. The old man frowned, setting his cup down as officers stepped out, their expressions tense. He stood slowly, his joints protesting, but he held his head high. He had faced worse in his life. "Sir, we need you to come with us," one officer said, his voice firm but not unkind. The old man blinked, confused. Had he forgotten to pay a bill? Broken some town rule he didn't know about? Before he could ask, the officers moved closer, and he noticed the way their hands rested near their belts, not aggressive, but cautious. Neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering. The old man had never been in trouble before. He was the kind of man who returned lost wallets and helped shovel snow for the elderly widow next door. Yet here he was, being guided into the back of a police car, his wrists cuffed, not tightly, but enough to make his heart pound. As the car pulled away, the old man stared out the window, watching his quiet street disappear. He didn't resist, didn't argue. Years of discipline kept him calm. But one thought nagged at him: why? What had he done? Meanwhile, miles away, his grandson was finishing a brutal training exercise. A Navy SEAL, the young man was used to pushing his body to the limit. His phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Whatever it was could wait. He had a mission to focus on. Little did he know, his grandfather was sitting in a cold interrogation room, confused and alone. And little did the police know, the man they had just arrested had a grandson who was one of the most dangerous men alive, trained, lethal, and fiercely protective of his family. The officers had no idea what was coming. The police station was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other. The old man sat in a stiff chair, his cuffs now removed, but the confusion hadn't left his face. Across from him, a detective flipped through a file, his expression unreadable. The room smelled of stale coffee and old paperwork. "Sir, do you know why you're here?" the detective asked, leaning forward. His voice was calm, but there was something in his eyes, doubt, maybe even guilt. The old man shook his head slowly. "No, son, I don't." His voice was steady, but his fingers tapped lightly on the table, a nervous habit from his army days. The detective hesitated, then slid a grainy black and white photo across the table. It showed a man in a hoodie, face partially hidden, standing outside a gas station late at night. The old man squinted at it, then frowned. "That's not me," he said simply. "We have witnesses who say otherwise," the detective replied. "There was a robbery at that gas station 2 nights ago. The clerk identified you." The old man's chest tightened. He hadn't left his house after dark in years, not since his knees started giving him trouble. He opened his mouth to explain, but the detective cut him off. "Look, I don't want to believe it either. But we have to follow the evidence." Outside the interrogation room, whispers spread among the officers. Some knew the old man, knew he was a veteran, knew he was harmless. But procedure was procedure. Meanwhile, the grandson's phone buzzed again. And again. Finally, he checked it, 3 missed calls from his aunt, then a text that made his blood run cold: "They took your grandfather. Police station. Hurry." His training kicked in before his emotions did. In minutes, he was in his car, speeding toward town. His mind raced. His grandfather, the man who'd taught him how to fish, how to shoot, how to stand tall even when life tried to break you, was locked up for something he didn't do. The SEAL's hands gripped the wheel tighter. He wasn't a man who yelled or made empty threats. But when it came to family, he didn't play games. Back at the station, the old man sat quietly, refusing to say another word without a lawyer. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Something about this didn't feel right. Then the front door burst open. Not with a kick, not with a shout, just a sudden, heavy silence as every cop in the room turned to see who had walked in. The grandson stood there, dressed in plain clothes, but his posture screamed military. His eyes scanned the room, calculating, assessing threats. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. "I'm here for my grandfather." The desk sergeant, an older cop with tired eyes, stood up slowly. "Son, you need to calm down. This is a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," the SEAL said, his voice like steel. "You arrested the wrong man." A younger officer stepped forward, hand hovering near his belt. "You don't get to walk in here, Ann." Before he could finish, the grandson pulled out his military ID and slapped it on the counter. The room went still. The detective from earlier picked it up, glanced at it, then paled. He looked at the old man, then back at the young soldier in front of him. No one spoke for a long moment. Then the old man's voice broke the silence, calm but firm. "I think it's time you boys called your chief." The chief wasn't just any cop. He was a former Marine, a man who'd seen enough of the world to know when things didn't add up. When the call reached him at home, he didn't ask questions, just pulled on his uniform jacket over his t-shirt and drove straight to the station. The moment he walked in, he felt the tension like a live wire. The old veteran sat quietly in the interrogation room, his face weary but calm. The grandson stood near the front desk, his posture relaxed but his eyes missing nothing. And the officers? They looked like men who suddenly realized they'd stepped into something much bigger than they'd expected. The chief took one look at the military ID still lying on the counter and let out a slow breath. "All right," he said, rubbing his forehead. "Someone start from the beginning." The detective who'd made the arrest shifted uncomfortably. "We had positive ID from the gas station clerk. Said it was definitely him." He gestured toward the old man. The SEAL didn't move, but his voice cut through the room. "My grandfather hasn't left his house after sunset in 3 years. His neighbor brings him groceries every Thursday. The diner owner delivers his coffee every morning at 7:30. He paused. "Check his medicine cabinet. He takes enough pills to make an all-night robbery pretty damn unlikely." A beat of silence. Then the chief turned to one of the officers. "Pull the gas station footage. Full 24 hours before and after the robbery." The old man finally spoke from his chair. "I don't want trouble," he said quietly. "Just want to know why someone would say it was me." That's when the young cop who'd been hovering near the door cleared his throat. "Sir, I think I might know." Everyone turned. The cop, couldn't have been more than 25, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "The clerk who ID'd him? He's not the most reliable witness." The detective's head snapped around. "What do you mean?" The young cop swallowed. "He's been written up twice this month for being drunk on shift. Last week he swore a middle schooler robbed him, turned out the kid was buying gum." The room went very still. The chief closed his eyes for a long second. When he opened them, he looked straight at the old veteran. "Sir, I think we owe you an apology." Outside, dawn was just starting to lighten the sky. The grandson helped his grandfather to the car, his hand steady under the old man's elbow. Neither spoke until the station was out of sight. "You didn't have to come down here like that," the old man said finally. The SEAL kept his eyes on the road. "Yes, I did." Back at the station, the chief was staring at the gas station footage on a computer screen. The robber's face was clearly visible now that someone had thought to enhance the image. It wasn't even close. The detective sank into a chair, his face in his hands. How the hell did we mess this up? The chief didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. We saw an old man who fit the description. Didn't look hard enough to see the man behind it. Meanwhile, the grandson pulled into his grandfather's driveway. The old house looked the same as always, the neat flower beds, the American flag by the door. But something had changed. As they walked inside, the old man stopped suddenly in the hallway. His hand trembled slightly as he pointed to the framed photos on the wall, generations of service, from Normandy to Afghanistan. They forgot, he said softly. They looked at me and forgot who I was. The SEAL put a hand on his grandfather's shoulder. No sir, he said. They just learned. Somewhere across town, the real gas station robber was counting his stolen cash, completely unaware that his freedom had an expiration date. And the grandson? He already had a plan. The coffee pot percolated in the quiet kitchen, its familiar gurgle usually comforting. But this morning, the sound felt hollow. The old man stared at his hands wrapped around the warm mug, the tremors more noticeable than usual. His grandson sat across from him, both men lost in their own thoughts as sunlight streamed through the curtains. They'll find him, the grandson said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, the same tone he used before missions. The old man shook his head. Not your fight, boy. Like hell it's not. The SEAL set his jaw. They put handcuffs on you. Made you sit in that room like some common criminal. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the table, a controlled tempo, like counting seconds before detonation. The grandfather studied his grandson's face, seeing the storm behind those soldiers' eyes. He'd seen that look before, in the mirror, decades ago. Justice ain't about revenge, he said quietly. It's about balance. The younger man met his gaze. Right now, that scale's tipped wrong. A car door slammed outside. Through the window, they saw a sheriff's cruiser pull up. The chief himself stepped out, hat in hand, his posture stiff with what might have been apology or apprehension. The grandson was on his feet before the knock came. The chief nodded when the door opened. Morning. Came to check on you, sir, he said, looking past the SEAL to where the old man still sat at the table. We're fine, the grandson said, his body blocking the doorway just enough to be noticeable. The chief sighed. Look, son. Don't call me that. A beat of silence. The chief regrouped. Petty officer, then. We've identified the actual suspect. Local kid with a record. We'll have him in custody by end of day. The grandfather appeared at his grandson's shoulder. Appreciate you coming by, Chief. His voice was warm but tired. Coffee's fresh if you want some. The chief looked relieved at the lifeline. As they sat at the kitchen table, the SEAL standing watch by the counter, the chief laid out the facts. The real robber was a 19-year-old who'd been hitting convenience stores across 3 counties. The clerk had been half-drunk when he'd mistakenly identified the old veteran. Internal reviews already started, the chief admitted, swirling his coffee. Procedures failed. We owe you more than an apology. The grandson's voice came from the corner, quiet but carrying. What happens to the clerk? The chief hesitated. Probably loses his job. Maybe charged with false reporting. The old man watched his grandson's face carefully. Saw the minute tightening around his eyes. Knew that look meant trouble. After the chief left, promising daily updates on the case, the grandson grabbed his keys. Where you headed? The grandfather asked, though he already knew. Gonna get some air. The old man caught his arm. Look at me. When the younger man turned, he continued, you walk into that gas station with that look on your face, you're no better than they were yesterday. For a long moment, they stood locked in silent battle, youth and age, fury and wisdom. Finally, the grandson exhaled sharply. Then what do you suggest? The old man smiled for the first time that morning. We do it the right way. An hour later, they walked into the gas station together. The clerk, a puffy-faced man with bloodshot eyes, went pale when he recognized the veteran. The old man approached the counter slowly. Heard you had some trouble the other night. The clerk's hands shook as he rang up a pack of gum the grandson had tossed on the counter. Look, mister, You made a mistake, the grandfather continued calmly. Mistakes happen. But son, you need to understand, what you did. He leaned in slightly. That cost people their dignity. That ain't something you walk away from without making right. The grandson watched, impressed despite himself, as his grandfather, without raising his voice, without making threats, guided the terrified clerk through a heartfelt apology and a promise to call the district attorney to correct his statement. As they walked back to the car, the SEAL shook his head. You're a better man than I am. The old man chuckled. Nah. Just been angry longer. You learn it burns you more than it burns them. Back at the station, the chief was reviewing the arrest plan for the real suspect when his phone buzzed. The message from his patrol captain made him sit up straight. Suspect spotted at the old mill outside town. Armed. Says he's not going back to prison. The chief grabbed his radio. All units, listen up. We've got a situation. Little did he know, the grandson's phone was buzzing with the same information, from military buddies who still had access to police scanners. The SEAL looked at his grandfather, conflict written across his face. The old man sighed. Go on. Just, come back in one piece. As the grandson sprinted to his car, two competing thoughts warred in his mind, duty to the law, and the burning need to protect what was his. Somewhere in between those two things lay the truth of who he really was. The tires kicked up gravel as the grandson peeled onto the rural road leading toward the old mill. His mind worked with military precision, assessing threats, calculating approaches. The police scanner app on his phone crackled with tense voices coordinating the perimeter. Subject last seen entering the east side of the building. Confirmed armed with a handgun. All units hold position until SWAT arrives. He parked a half-mile out and moved through the woods like a shadow. 20 yards from the crumbling brick structure, he paused behind an oak tree. Through the scope of his rifle, always kept in his trunk, he could see the suspect pacing inside a second-floor window. Young. Jittery. Desperate. The police had set up a roadblock down the lane. He could hear their megaphone echoing, "Come out with your hands up." The kid in the window raised his middle finger toward the sound. The grandson exhaled slowly. This wasn't his mission. These weren't his orders. But as he watched the kid wipe sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand, he recognized something dangerous, the look of an animal backed into a corner. His phone vibrated. A text from his grandfather, "Remember who you are." Below, a rookie cop moved too far from cover, his service weapon drawn but his stance unsure. The grandson's stomach tightened. He'd seen this play out before in war zones. Fear and inexperience created deadly mistakes. Then everything happened at once. The suspect suddenly appeared at a ground-level window, gun raised. The rookie froze. A senior officer shouted. And before conscious thought took over, the grandson was running, not toward the threat, but toward the panicked cop. He tackled the officer behind a concrete barrier just as the first gunshot rang out. "Stay down," the grandson barked, his combat reflexes taking over. He snatched the officer's radio. "This is Petty Officer First Class Riley Carter," he lied smoothly, using the authority in his voice like a weapon. "Suspect is in northwest ground floor window. All units hold fire, I'm going in." Before anyone could respond, he was moving, low and fast along the tree line, then slipping through a broken basement window. The mill smelled of mildew and rotting wood. Somewhere above, the kid was muttering to himself, footsteps creaking across old floorboards. The grandson cleared each room with practiced efficiency. Kitchen, empty. Storage room, clear. Stairwell. A floorboard squeaked behind him. He spun to find the suspect 10 feet away, pistol wavering wildly. The kid couldn't have been older than 20, his acne-scarred face slick with sweat. "Don't move, man. I'll shoot." The grandson didn't raise his own weapon. "I know you will," he said calmly. "But then what? You kill me, swat burns this place down with you in it." He took a slow step forward. "Or you walk out that front door right now, and live to see tomorrow." The gun trembled. "They'll send me back to prison." "Yeah. Maybe." Another step. "But my grandfather? The man you let take the fall for your robbery? He spent 3 hours in handcuffs because of you." His voice hardened. "And he still hopes you make it out alive." Something flickered in the kid's eyes. The grandson saw it, the moment of hesitation, and moved like lightning. His palm struck the wrist, the gun clattered to the floor, and before the kid could react, he was pinned face down with a knee in his back. "Don't struggle," the grandson warned as he zip-tied the kid's hands with a plastic restraint from his pocket. "You'll live through this." Outside, the police surged forward at the sound of the struggle. They found the SEAL standing over the subdued suspect, both of them breathing hard. The chief arrived last, his face unreadable as he surveyed the scene. His eyes locked onto the grandson. "You disobeyed a police perimeter." The grandson shrugged out of his tactical vest. "You're welcome." As the officers led the suspect away, the kid turned back suddenly. "Hey! That old man, is he really your grandpa?" The grandson paused. "Yeah." The kid swallowed hard. Tell him I'm sorry, okay?" For the first time, the SEAL's stern expression softened slightly. "Tell him yourself at your trial." Back at the station, paperwork piled up on the chief's desk, incident reports, use of force documentation, and one very unusual statement from a Navy SEAL about why he'd ignored police protocol. The grandson sat across from him, sipping terrible station coffee. "You know I could charge you with interference," the chief said without looking up. "You could." The chief finally met his gaze. "Why'd you really do it?" The grandson set down his cup. "That rookie cop? He'd be dead right now if someone hadn't moved." He leaned forward. "And that kid? He deserved to face what he did to my grandfather. Not die in some shootout." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, the chief slid a form across the desk. "Sign this. Says you acted as a concerned citizen assisting law enforcement in good faith." He almost smiled. "Might even get you a commendation." The grandson stood to leave, but the chief's voice stopped him at the door. "Your grandfather ever tell you about the Silver Star he won in Vietnam?" The SEAL turned slowly. "He never mentioned it." The chief nodded. "Figures. Real heroes never do." When the grandson returned home, he found his grandfather on the porch, 2 glasses of lemonade waiting. "Made the news," the old man said, nodding toward the newspaper on the table. Front page showed a blurry photo of the grandson leading the suspect out of the mill. The SEAL sat heavily, suddenly exhausted. "You mad?" The old man chuckled. "Would it matter if I was?" They drank in comfortable silence as fireflies began to blink in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down the road, a car backfired, both men flinched instinctively, then exchanged wry smiles. The grandson finally spoke. "Chief says you won a Silver Star." His grandfather's smile faded. "That was a long time ago. Tell me about it." The old man studied his glass for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than his grandson had ever heard it. "Not tonight." And for the first time in his life, the grandson understood, Some stories weren't his to demand. Some wounds never fully healed. Some medals came at prices no one should have to pay. He reached over and squeezed his grandfather's shoulder. No words needed. Inside the house, the phone began to ring. The phone kept ringing. The old man made no move to answer it. He just stared at the screen door like the sound might stop if he waited long enough. His grandson watched the way his grandfather's fingers tightened around the lemonade glass, knuckles going white, then relaxing, before finally standing up with a sigh. "Probably another reporter," the grandson muttered, pushing through the screen door. He snatched the receiver mid-ring. "Yeah?" A woman's voice, sharp with authority. "Petty Officer Carter? This is Lieutenant Commander Hayes at Naval Special Warfare Command." The grandson stiffened. Behind him, he heard his grandfather's chair scrape across the porch boards as the old man stood up. Military people didn't call unless something was wrong. "Ma'am," the grandson said automatically, his free hand curling into a fist at his side. "We've been monitoring your situation." The lieutenant commander's voice carried that particular blend of concern and disapproval unique to senior officers. "Local news footage shows you engaging in an armed confrontation while on leave." The grandson closed his eyes. He knew where this was going. "With respect, ma'am, I prevented." "Save it for the review board," Hayes cut in. "You're recalled effective immediately. Report to Coronado by 0800 tomorrow." A pause. "And Carter?" "Pack for an extended stay." The line went dead. The old man was standing in the doorway now, watching his grandson's face. He didn't need to ask, the answer was written in the way the younger man slowly hung up the phone, like it weighed 100 pounds. "Navy," the grandfather guessed. The grandson nodded. "Recalled me. Probably looking at disciplinary action." For a long moment, neither spoke. Crickets chirped outside. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. Normal sounds of a normal evening that suddenly felt anything but normal. The old man broke the silence first. "You did what you thought was right." "Yeah." The grandson ran a hand through his hair. "Doesn't mean the Navy will see it that way." His grandfather moved to the ancient refrigerator and pulled out 2 beers, popping the caps off with his wedding ring, a trick the grandson had never mastered. "Sit," he ordered, shoving 1 bottle across the table. They drank in silence for a few minutes before the old man cleared his throat. "You ever hear about the time I got court-martialed?" The grandson nearly choked on his beer. "What?" 1968, Da Nang. His grandfather took a long swig, staring at some point beyond the kitchen wall. "Our CO ordered a village cleared. Intel said VC were using it as cover." The old man's thumb traced the condensation on his bottle. "I refused." The grandson stared. This was a story he'd never heard, never even imagined. His grandfather, the by-the-book soldier he'd idolized since childhood, disobeying a direct order? What happened? The old man smiled faintly. "Spent 2 weeks in the brig before they figured out that intel came from some ARVN officer settling a personal grudge." He met his grandson's eyes. "Sometimes doing the right thing looks like insubordination to people who weren't there." The grandson exhaled sharply. "This isn't Vietnam." "No," his grandfather agreed. "But principles don't change just because the uniforms do." They finished their beers in silence. Upstairs, the grandson packed his sea bag with mechanical precision, uniforms, boots, the folding knife his grandfather had given him when he first made it through BUD/S. At the bottom of the bag, his fingers brushed against something small and metallic. His grandfather's silver star. He hadn't even realized the old man had slipped it in there. Dawn came too soon. The grandson stood on the porch with his bag slung over one shoulder, watching his grandfather sip coffee like it was any other morning. "You didn't have to give me this," the grandson said quietly, holding up the medal. The old man shrugged. Maybe I just wanted you to have a reminder. Of what? That sometimes the brass is wrong. His grandfather set the coffee cup down with deliberate care. And sometimes the only orders worth following are the ones you give yourself. A taxi honked out front. The grandson hesitated, then pulled his grandfather into a rough hug, something they hadn't done since he was a kid. The old man smelled like coffee and Old Spice and gun oil, just like always. Kick their asses, the grandfather murmured into his shoulder. The grandson laughed despite himself. Yes, sir. As the taxi pulled away, the old man remained on the porch, watching until the car disappeared around the bend. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a faded photograph, a young soldier standing beside his buddies in a jungle clearing, all of them grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. He traced one finger over the faces of the men who hadn't come home. Inside, the phone began to ring again. The phone rang 6 times before the answering machine clicked on. The old man stood in the hallway, listening to the robotic voice recite the number he'd had since 1972. A beep. Then silence. Then breathing. You gonna pick up or what? The voice sent a jolt through him, gravelly and familiar, the kind of voice that carried across parade grounds without needing to shout. The old man snatched the receiver so fast his elbow cracked against the wall. Christ, Cooper, you're supposed to be dead. On the other end, the laugh sounded like a truck engine turning over. Reports of my demise were greatly exaggerated. Heard you got yourself arrested. The old man sagged against the wall, suddenly 17 again and listening to his best friend's stupid jokes in the barracks. Wasn't arrested. Temporarily detained. Bullshit. Saw the mugshot online. You looked constipated. 40 years evaporated in an instant. The old man could almost smell the jungle, the damp earth, the insect repellent, the ever-present stink of fear they'd all pretended not to notice. Why the hell are you calling, Coop? A pause. Then, they're recalling the unit. The words landed like a grenade in the quiet hallway. The old man's knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the doorframe. What? Pentagon's reopening investigations. Some senator's kid got fragged in Afghanistan, now they're digging up every questionable engagement since Korea. Cooper's voice dropped. They're coming for medals, Joe. Starting with silver stars. Outside, a breeze stirred the curtains. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower sputtered to life. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary world that suddenly felt paper-thin. The old man closed his eyes. They can have the damn medal. They can't have the truth. Cooper exhaled sharply. You know how this works. They'll offer deals, admit to exaggerating your actions, keep your benefits. Fight it, Anne. And what? They'll court-martial a 70-year-old with emphysema? The old man barked a laugh. Let them try. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the static of a bad connection. When Cooper spoke again, his voice was different, softer. Remember that kid? The one you carried 2 clicks with a bullet in your leg? The old man's hand went automatically to his thigh, where the scar still ached before rain. What about him? He's a 3-star now. A meaningful pause. Says if you testify about Da Nang, he can make this go away. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the sudden silence. The old man stared at the photo on the wall, his grandson in dress blues, proud and straight-backed. I'll think about it, he lied. Cooper knew him too well. Don't do anything stupid, Joe. The old man hung up without answering. He moved through the house like a ghost, touching familiar objects, the chipped coffee mug from the VFW, the shadow box with his service ribbons, the folded flag from his wife's funeral. In the garage, beneath a stack of old National Geographics, he found what he was looking for, a locked metal box with USMC stenciled across the top. The key hung around his neck, hidden under his shirt. Hadn't taken it off in 53 years. Inside the box lay 3 things. A black and white photo of 7 grinning teenagers in uniform, arms slung over each other's shoulders. A blood-stained map of Quang Nam Province. A single .45 caliber bullet. The old man sat on the garage floor for a long time, turning the bullet between his fingers. Finally, he reached for the phone. Meanwhile, halfway across the country, his grandson sat ramrod straight in a sterile conference room at Naval Base Coronado. Across the table, 3 senior officers studied his file with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Lieutenant Commander Hayes tapped her pen against the table. "Let's discuss your little vigilante act, petty officer." The grandson kept his face blank. "With respect, ma'am, assisting law enforcement isn't vigilantism." The oldest officer, a captain with cold blue eyes, leaned forward. "You breached a police perimeter. Engaged an armed suspect without authorization. That's not assisting, that's interfering." The grandson met his gaze. "With all due respect, sir, that armed suspect would have killed a rookie cop if I hadn't intervened." Hayes flipped a page in his file. "Your grandfather was Army, correct? Vietnam?" The sudden shift threw him. "Yes, ma'am. Silver Star recipient." She made it sound like an accusation. "You know why he got it?" The grandson hesitated. "No, ma'am." The officers exchanged glances. The captain steepled his fingers. "We have reason to believe your grandfather's commendation may be questionable. And given your recent behavior, we're concerned about a pattern of disregard for proper authority." The room tilted slightly. The grandson's nails bit into his palms. "Sir, with all due respect, my grandfather's service record has nothing to do with." "It has everything to do with it." The captain's fist hit the table. "You think this is just about some gas station robbery? We're talking about the integrity of the entire chain of command." Hayes intervened smoothly. "Here's what's going to happen, petty officer. You're going to take 30 days leave. And during that time, you're going to have a long talk with your grandfather." She slid a folder across the table. "About what really happened at Da Nang." The grandson opened the folder. And froze. Staring up at him was a decades-old photo of his grandfather, young, grim-faced, standing beside a body bag. The caption beneath read, "Lieutenant Joseph Carter with deceased Viet Cong operative, March 1968. But the grandson barely saw the text. Because his eyes were locked on the pistol in his grandfather's hand. The same make and model as the bullet currently sitting on his grandfather's garage floor. The grandson stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. The young man in the picture wore his grandfather's face but carried himself differently, shoulders tense, jaw clenched, eyes dark with something the grandson recognized from his own reflection after bad missions. "That's not the whole story," Lieutenant Commander Hayes said quietly. The captain slid another document across the table, a faded after-action report with entire paragraphs blacked out. "What we know, March 18, 1968. Your grandfather's unit entered a village called Hoa Phu. 2 hours later, they radioed for a medevac. 1 body bag went out." The captain's finger tapped the redacted lines. "What happened in between? That's what the review board wants to know." The grandson's throat tightened. He thought of the silver star hidden in his sea bag, the way his grandfather always changed the subject when Vietnam came up. "Why now?" Hayes exchanged glances with the other officers. "Because the man in that body bag wasn't Viet Cong." Outside the conference room windows, seagulls circled over San Diego Bay. The grandson watched them bank against the blue sky, envying their freedom. When he spoke again, his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "You want me to interrogate my grandfather?" "We want the truth," the captain corrected. "Before the Pentagon subpoenas him." Back in his temporary barracks room, the grandson emptied his sea bag onto the narrow bed. His grandfather's silver star gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights. He turned it over, studying the engraving, "For gallantry in action against an armed enemy." His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Your grandfather's asking about flights to DC. You might want to get home." The drive took 9 hours. He made it in 7. Dusk painted the sky purple when he pulled into the familiar driveway. The house looked peaceful, curtains open, porch light on, the old rocking chair moving slightly in the evening breeze. But something felt wrong. The front door was unlocked. "Grandad?" Silence. Then, a creak from the kitchen. The grandson moved tactically, muscles coiled. He rounded the corner to find his grandfather sitting at the table, a half-packed suitcase beside him, staring at a plane ticket to Washington. The old man didn't look up. "They showed you the photo." It wasn't a question. The grandson pulled out the chair opposite him, the legs scraping loudly. "They said the man you killed wasn't VC." His grandfather's hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he pushed the plane ticket aside. His name was Nguyen Van Hai. Schoolteacher. Father of 4. A long pause. And no, he wasn't Viet Cong. The confession hung between them. The grandson studied his grandfather's face, the deep wrinkles, the faded scar along his hairline, the eyes that had seen too much. This wasn't the hero from childhood stories. This was just a man. A man who'd lived with a secret for 50 years. What happened? The old man reached into his shirt pocket and produced a dog-eared photograph, the same one from the metal box, showing 7 young Marines. His finger traced the face of a grinning kid who couldn't have been more than 19. Roberts was our point man. Good kid. Wanted to be a preacher after the war. He flipped the photo over. Someone had written Hoa Phu, March 18, 68 in faded ink. We were ordered to clear the village. Standard procedure, round up military-age males, search for weapons caches. The old man's voice grew distant. Roberts found something in the schoolhouse. Came running out, shouting about explosives. The grandson watched his grandfather's throat work as he swallowed hard. Then the shot came. Sniper. Took Roberts right through the neck. The old man's finger moved to another face in the photo, a serious-looking young man with sharp features. Our lieutenant panicked. Ordered the whole village burned. Said the schoolteacher must have been the spotter. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed to life. The old man looked up, his eyes glistening. I was the only one who'd seen where the shot really came from, the tree line beyond the village. VC sniper team, long gone by then. He took a shuddering breath. So I followed my lieutenant into the schoolhouse. And when he put his pistol to that teacher's head, I made a choice. The grandson didn't need to ask what choice. The photograph from the Navy's file said it all. You killed your own officer. His grandfather nodded once, sharply. Then carried Robert's body 2 clicks to the LZ while bleeding from a leg wound. Command assumed the lieutenant died in the same sniper attack. Gave me a medal for eliminating enemy combatants. His mouth twisted. Only living witnesses were Vietnamese villagers. And who was going to believe them? The grandson sat back, his mind reeling. All these years, he'd modeled himself after his grandfather's quiet strength, his uncompromising honor. Now he understood why the old man had been so insistent about doing things the right way, about balance. You're going to DC to confess. The old man shrugged. Cooper says they'll take my pension if I don't. And if you do? Maybe I sleep better. He met his grandson's gaze. That kid you captured at the mill? He deserves to know some mistakes can be made right. The grandson thought about the Navy's file, the way the officers had watched for his reaction. They're using me to get to you. Of course they are. His grandfather almost smiled. But you're not the leverage they think you are. He reached across the table, turning over the silver star so the inscription caught the light. Truth doesn't make this any less real. That day, what I did, it was still gallantry. Just not the kind they put on medals. The grandson exhaled sharply. All at once, he understood why his grandfather had given him the medal, not as a challenge, but as a reminder that honor wasn't about following orders. It was about following your conscience. His phone buzzed, Hayes checking in. The grandson silenced it. You're not going to D.C. His grandfather raised an eyebrow. No. No. The grandson stood, pocketing the silver star. We are. Together. 2 days later, they sat side by side in a different conference room, this one in the Pentagon. The review board members were older, their uniforms heavier with ribbons. The grandson watched them study his grandfather with a mix of respect and wariness. The chairman, a white-haired general, leaned forward. Mr. Carter, before you begin, you should know this conversation is being recorded. The old man nodded. Good. I want it on record that what happened at Hoa Fu was. The door burst open. A tall man in a 3-star general's uniform strode in, his face set in hard lines. The grandson recognized him instantly, the serious young Marine from his grandfather's photo, aged 50 years. Sir, the chairman began, this is a closed. I know what it is. The general's voice cracked like thunder. He turned to the old man. Joe Carter. Still causing trouble, I see. The old man's lips quirked. Tried to retire, sir. Paperwork got lost. The general snorted, then addressed the board. Gentlemen, I have here sworn affidavits from 7 Hoa Fu villagers, all confirming Lieutenant Mercer's unlawful order and Sergeant Carter's intervention. He dropped a thick folder on the table. Also, ballistic reports proving the sniper round that killed Private Roberts came from a Soviet rifle, not the pistol found on the schoolteacher. The chairman frowned. General, with all due respect, this case involves the integrity of... The integrity of what? The general's hand slammed down on the table, making everyone jump. A lie we've all been too cowardly to confront? Sergeant Carter did what every one of us should have done that day. Silence fell. The grandson watched his grandfather sit perfectly still, his face unreadable. Finally, the chairman sighed. General, what would you have us do? The old man answered before his former comrade could speak. Strip my medal if you have to. But put the truth in Robert's file. His family deserves that much. The general's stern expression softened. They already know, Joe. His daughter's a chaplain at Bethesda. She's the one who tracked down the villagers. Something fragile passed across the old man's face. The grandson reached over and squeezed his shoulder, just as his grandfather had done for him so many times. The chairman closed his folder. This committee will take your testimony under advisement. Petty Officer Carter? He nodded to the grandson. Your leave is reinstated. Expect new orders within the week. As they walked out of the Pentagon into the bright sunlight, the grandson nudged his grandfather. Chaplain, huh? Think Roberts would have approved? The old man smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. That kid would have talked God's ear off. They stopped at the Vietnam Memorial on the way home. The old man found Robert's name on the black granite, then Nguyen Van Huy's on a separate plaque honoring civilian casualties. He placed a single silver star at the base of the wall. The grandson watched tourists pass by, families with strollers, school groups, veterans in motorcycle jackets. No one noticed the 2 men standing quietly, one young and one old, their shoulders touching as they remembered men they'd never met but would always carry with them. On the flight home, the grandson finally asked the question that had been burning in his chest since the kitchen confession. Would you do it again? Knowing what it cost you? His grandfather didn't hesitate. Every time. The grandson nodded, staring out the window at the clouds below. Somewhere over Ohio, he reached into his pocket and slipped the silver star back into his grandfather's hand. Neither spoke. None of it needed to be said. 3 weeks later, the grandson received new orders, not to a disciplinary hearing, but to SEAL Team 5. The enclosed note read simply, "Sometimes the right decision looks like insubordination. Gen. M." His grandfather framed the note and hung it beside the old photo of 7 young Marines, now displayed proudly in the living room. And when the phone rang that evening, both men let the machine pick up.